Hey everyone, it's Nikki and Mo here, and we wanted to give you a look behind the curtain of how we do our ears. Here we have our supplies, starting with faux fur in both of our colors, a thin craft foam, hot glue, scissors, pencils, and a marker. And then we've got backup glue for the hot glue gun, a craft knife, a ruler, and, of course, some paper. I like to start with a rough geometric shape and sketch in the rounded sides to make a more realistic ear shape for whenever we're doing a dog type character.
The first thing I did was I wrote down all of my measurements that I knew I was going to be using, and then I went ahead and made sort of a trapezoid shape because the top of them ended up being a little bit smaller than the bottom. And I made sure to round out one of the bottom corners as well to give me the exact shape I needed for the ears. And I made sure to label my pattern as well.
See, in using the power of internet magic, I cut out my pattern.
Lady's ears weren't as straightforward. The first step I did was cut around all four sides of that shape. Then I folded down along the center line to make sure that both sides were going to be even. And then I went ahead and cut along the curved edge that I drew.
After remembering to label my pattern, I trace it back onto another piece of paper and measure a consistent amount in from the edge. I'm doing this because this style of ear has a very distinct outline of the fur that shows up around the pink inside of the ear.
Because Lady's ears were a little simpler and only needed one pattern piece, my next step was just to start tracing that pattern onto my fur pieces. And I made sure to do it twice for each of my ears.
And now to get to the fur. What's important to do is always make sure that the fur is going in the direction that you want it before you start to trace. I like to use a black marker for tracing onto it, mostly because I know that this side will be hidden, so that if you make a little bit of a mess, it doesn't matter as much. And so I do this for both the back and the front portions of the ear before I even start to think about cutting this out. And now wait, not yet. For cutting out faux fur, it's important to use a craft knife so that you don't cut off all of the fur. This makes it so that you're only cutting the fabric that is the base of your faux fur and not cutting off any fur that would be hanging off the edge of the fur. Using scissors would have cut all of this off, whereas the craft knife only does a little.
So my next step was to carefully cut out the shapes, just like he said, using the same craft knife, and I made sure to use those shallow cuts so I wasn't cutting through directly all of the fibers on the other side. And I did that for all four pieces of my ears.
With the foam, it's almost as much for support as it is to make the look. Starting with the original shape that we made for the ears, we actually trace inside of that to make a shape that will form the main body. so that the fur can actually go over the edges of the foam, hiding it.
Alright, so now that you have everything cut out, it's time to start assembling. The first thing that I did for Tramp's ears was make my wire frame. So I bent it to the shape of the foam piece and using my pliers, and then I went ahead and started hot gluing it to that foam. When I cut out my wire pieces, I made sure to leave a little bit of wire down at the bottom past the foam piece, because this will be how we attach it to a headband later. We actually learned this technique through watching another cosplayer's video here on YouTube, and it was extremely helpful for us, so we'll be sure to link their video in the description for you guys to go check out. The next step was to start assembling all the pieces, but when I went to go lay them all together, I realized that the foam pieces had ended up being a bit too big, so I had to make sure to trim them down first. Then I went ahead and started gluing everything together. So the key to doing this is you want to sandwich your foam in between your two fur pieces. So once I had the back attached, I started gluing down the front piece and making sure every single one of my edges was glued together neatly and nothing was showing through. And that's it, and now we have two foldable and bendable ears for Tramp that we'll be attaching to a headband later on. Lady's ears were a bit different. I didn't want hers to be as structured, so I skipped out on the foam and wire entirely. I just started gluing the two fur pieces together, making sure to line them up carefully all the way down, and that was it. And now I have two floppy ears that I will be safety fitting to my wig later.
So thank you guys for watching through the video. Hopefully this is able to help some of you out there with your own costumes. And stay tuned to see the final results of this cosplay.